Welcome back to the Foundry. Today I'm starting on a new old project. Let me introduce you to Clark, my 1971 CY20B. Now Clark, he's up in years and well, he's got some problems, big problems. So I think it's a fair question as to whether just scrap this elderly iron in favor of something more modern or endeavor to persevere and try to fix it. And that's something I've thought a lot about. And well, I think you know which way this is going. So let's get into it. So I've owned this little machine for the better part of 15 years, and I'm actually quite fond of it because it meets a very specific need within my operations. And it's because it's so compact, yet it has tall pneumatic tires, and it's lightweight, so it gets around really good out on the yard. Couple that with a 3-stage mast, it's just a super handy little unit. But the problem that developed is a very severe transmission leak. So what started out as a dime-sized puddle of ATF overnight turned into a $50, which turned into a drip during operation, which turned into a stream of fluid coming out of it, rendering it pretty much unusable. So that's when I red tagged it, and it's been parked here for about 3 years. Now, transmission leaks usually require serious surgery. And given the advanced age of the machine, I thought, man, it's gonna be tough to find a repair manual, much less parts. And it was. I looked for 2 years and found nothing. So then I decided to try to find a replacement, something a little bit more modern that fit the criteria of being compact, lightweight, and on pneumatic tires in my price point. I looked high and low for about 2 years and never found anything this small on pneumatic tires. So then on a whim, I decided to, I was scrolling the web one day and I thought about this old forklift, did a quick search and actually located someone who had just listed a parts manual that had exploded diagrams and parts numbers. So I scooped that up. I was able from that to determine what I think is wrong with it and identify the parts that I'd need. So I searched for those parts and I actually found somebody that had some new old stock parts. Shortly after that, I found a service manual. So I think we're in business here. So let's dig into it and see what we can do. The transmission is back here, and it shares fluid with the differentials, and for that reason some people call this a transaxle, but I guess technically it's not. It's got a differential gears right inside at the bottom of this housing, and then this area is supposed to be dry. Inside this housing, it's a brake chamber. That's where your brake drum and shoes and whatnot, and then out here it's got final drives. So my fluid was coming out of ports that are on the bottom of the brake chambers, and that's supposed to be a dry area. So a little temporary fix I did, just so I could get it usable without making a mess, is I actually tapped those holes and threaded an MPT plug in each one. That way it would hold the fluid until I got done using it, and then I could drain the fluid, and instead of having it drain itself all over the floor. And that's why I always parked it on these ramps. That way I could drain that housing because there's not a lot of room when it's down on the ground. So I think the play here is to raise up the front end, get it blocked up, and get the wheels off and see what we have to do from there. Now, forklifts are pretty heavy, deceptively so, even though they're small. This one weighs about as much as the average passenger car. It's one reason it gets around off-road so well. It's not quite so heavy. It's only a 2,000-pound lift capacity. So I'm hoping this 3-ton floor jack will do the trick. I'm also hoping that I can pick it up from the bottom of the mast. Looks pretty safe. So what I'm going to be dealing with here is the differential assembly, and the parts in question are going to be number 14, which is the differential bearing carrier oil seal, and number 13, which is the O-ring that seals around the seal retainer. And the fun part is going to be getting to these. We're going to have to pull the wheels, the final drives, the brakes, and the axles. So right here on the rim it says deflate tires before removing wheel nuts. And I don't know exactly which nuts it's talking about, because these are two-piece rims. I'm assuming it's talking about the nuts, or actually this is the bolt side, but I'm assuming it's talking about the two that actually bolt the wheel together. But just, I don't know. So just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go ahead and deflate the tires before I pull them off. These things have been on here for a very long time. All right, so this looks like a brake drum here, but it's not. This is actually a ring gear for the final drive. The brake drum is in there, and I was just looking at what I needed to do to unhook the brake line. I've been cleaning on it a little bit, and I discovered somebody has snapped off the bleeder screw. So that's unfortunate. So it looks like I'm gonna have to dig into the brakes and fix that, or else I won't be able to bleed the brakes when I'm done. It occurred to me before I get much further, I want to pull the plug on the brake chamber. These are the NPT plugs that I tapped and installed, and the system should be pretty well dry as much as it's leaked out, but there could be some residual, so best to deal with it now. Yeah, that's what was in my brakes, and that is supposed to be dry in there. So in addition to the axle seals, I'm thinking I've probably got all manner of leaks in this transmission. To my knowledge, I think there's obviously the pump seal is between the engine and the transmission in the torque converter area. I think there's two other seals up there. There's also two O-rings around this flange. You know, all of that could be leaking, but I really don't want to have to get into all that, at least not on this adventure. So definitely the axle was the worst leak. So I'm going to fix that. And you can see I've got where there's a transmission pan here with a gasket, and it's leaking a little bit. But anyway, I think knocking out this axle will be a big help in regards to fixing the leaks. So I don't mind a little puddle here and there. I just don't need it streaming out everywhere while I'm driving it. So hopefully this takes care of that. We're just gonna have to play it by ear. So here's our final drive and brake assembly. This is the actual axle. It's really kind of a stub shaft. There's a pinion on the end of it, and it turns that ring gear. But this right in here is our true culprit. Best I can tell, that seal right there is probably worn out. And then there's an O-ring on the outside of this flange that's the seal retainer. So I'm going to buzz these nuts off and pull that out, and we should be able to make our actual repair. I think I about got this thing pulled out of here. It's taking me longer to get the seal retainer out than it did the whole rest of the project. There we go. Oh, this thing had more fluid in it than I thought. All right, I see what the deal is. So the differential, this is the differential. We're looking at the carrier, and this seal retainer is also the bearing retainer. Apparently that's got the bearing race in it. Looks good. That's why it was so hard to get this thing out of here. So I had to be careful putting that back in here. Presumeretically, we are still connected on, we're still supported on that other side, so the carrier shouldn't just flop around in there too hard. And then of course we have our shims right here. I'm just gonna carefully not touch those. And let's see what our actual failure. Oh yeah, that seal is shot. We also have an O-ring around the retainer there. I'll get this up on the bench, we'll take a closer look at it. Yeah, this was definitely our problem. If I can get you in there, this seal, see it just flopping around in here? It is just totally destroyed. It has swelled up and just totally come apart. That's why the fluid was just essentially just pouring out of that thing. This O-ring here held up a little bit better. I went ahead and got one of them as well. You can see in here, so this chamber here is all supposed to be dry, and you can see how long it's been leaking, and that in turn has probably saturated my brake shoes. Ideally, I was hoping just to pop the final drive off, make this repair, stick it back on, bleed the brakes, be done with it. And of course do the other side, but being how my bleeder screw, someone has snapped that off decades ago, I'm not going to be able to bleed the brakes. So I'm going to have to get in here anyway. It's a good idea, if you're in something this far, check the brakes, see if they're wore out, or in my case, oil saturated. So I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do about that just yet, but we'll get into that. I can only imagine the rest of the seals in the transmission are probably much like this one, but man, resealing the whole transmission is a pretty formidable job. I mean, once you're in it that far, the engine is not too far off from needing a rebuild. So it's almost like, if I can get a couple more years out of this repair, or at least until it's time to do something with that engine, that would be the ideal time to reseal the transmission. But here's the rubber had just gotten so soft that it just crumbled and fell out. It wasn't hard and cracked, it was soft and swelled up. So it's almost as if it had a poor reaction with the additives in the fluid. And that makes sense. I first noticed the leak 15 years ago, right after its first service. And it calls for type A transmission fluid, which I think modern equivalent's Dexron 6. Of course, 15 years ago, it could have been Dex 3, I don't remember. And a lot of times, if fluid hadn't been changed for many, many years, and then you change it, the seals have trouble handling the new additives. And so that's probably what got it. But in my case, I didn't have a choice, because when I bought the forklift, there was actually water in the transmission. The fluid was pink. That's the only reason I changed it. And of course, here we are now. So it seems our brake is sticking a little bit. I don't think there's an exterior adjustment. You have to get the drum off to adjust the shoes. But I'm unable to turn the final drive at all. And the drum doesn't want to slide off, so this is going to be great fun. I'm just going to try to walk this thing off of here with these two pry bars. And ideally, I would like to do it without breaking the housing. There we go. Well, the inside of the drum looks pretty good. Very surprising. I figured it'd be pretty well rusted. But I guess with all the transmission fluid that was leaking in there, it kind of took care of it. Now here's our wheel cylinder. Boots are all swelled up. Look at that. It's just awful. The shoe linings don't look bad, but they're definitely saturated. I was just trying to figure on what kind of adjusters this thing has, whether it's mechanical. Oh yeah, see now my finals are turning. Good deal. It appears to have the mechanical adjusters. See if I can get you in there. So somebody has probably put some shoes on this thing, just given how old it is, you know. The adjusters are right there, and from what I understand, they're a pain in the neck to deal with. A lot of people just don't even touch them as long as they're in a pretty decent spot. So I'm going to have to look at that. But for sure, we're going to need a wheel cylinder because this one's nasty and got a broken bleeder screws broke off of it. So nothing in the brakes appears to be too bad off, except for the wheel cylinder. So I don't know how long I've been calling that a master cylinder, if I have, but it's a wheel cylinder. So the adjusters look like they're in good shape. It will remain to be seen if they're in the correct position, but I for sure need a wheel cylinder. The hardware looks really good, the springs and such. I mean, typically you'd want to replace those if you were replacing shoes, but I haven't convinced myself to replace the shoes yet. I think I can take some solvent or some brake clean and really clean these up. If it were a high-speed vehicle, I would just put some new shoes on it, but we're not talking about anything real serious here. But one thing that is concerning is I found this Woodruff key just randomly floating around in the bottom of this thing, and we hadn't dealt with anything that involves a Woodruff key. The drum is splined, the differential's splined. Nothing over here needs a Woodruff key, so I don't know where it came from. It's got me a little bit concerned. It's quite possible, given the amount of buildup in there, that it just fell in there at some point in time when they were working on something else, maybe. Because the back here is, of course, this is where your wheel cylinder goes, but there's also a gap around this thing, and that's how all this crud gets in here, is through right there. So it's possible it just fell in there, but it's one of them things. You get into something just to fix one little thing, and it turns into all sorts of things. So I went in to fix an oil seal, Now I'm gonna have to work on the brakes. Now we got random Woodruff keys flying out at me. So I'm tempted to get into the final drive, and honestly it probably needs to be repacked anyway. It calls to be repacked about every 1,000 hours, and there's no way to know how many hours is on it, so probably a good idea to tear this down and repack that. Well, here we go. In for a penny, in for a pound, I guess. It's definitely not dry. Bearings look pretty good. It could stand a repack, you know, but all right, so there it is. Okay, so under this spindle is another O-ring, maybe. I'm not sure. I have to look back at the parts diagram, but I hesitated to do this because they were talking about having to put new seals in it if you went in this far, and I don't know that I can find them. It was hard enough finding what I found. But since this is grease, this is not an oil chamber, so it's not actually having to hold oil in. It's just keeping dust and dirt and things out. So this out here appears to be a felt seal. It's not in bad shape. There's more of a, they're calling it an oil seal. It must be on the other side of this shaft. But honestly, I don't see any reason to take this shaft out. It draws lubrication from that open bearing right there. So I can pump grease into that. I can clean this up, pump grease into that bearing, grease the ring gear good, and repack my bearings. And this felt seal is still intact. So I'm inclined to let the seals bump on this final drive. So I believe I'm just going to order 2 wheel cylinders, because odds are, you know, the other side is going to look just like the side we just got done taking apart. So speaking of ordering parts, so I found the axle seals somebody had. They had 3 of them, so I went ahead and got 3 in the event that I screw one up putting it in. They weren't very expensive. I also got the O-ring to go on the flange. Now this O-ring was $15. And there ain't nothing to it. It's just a regular O-ring. So you might think, you know, why didn't I take the old one off and measure it and just buy a couple of 10-cent O-rings? Well, the reason why is I knew this old one was going to be stretched or possibly even totally disintegrated. So I just couldn't rely on that. Now, unfortunately, they only had 1 O-ring, but the good thing about that is I think it affords me an opportunity to save a little money, because I can measure the new O-ring, and I know I'm getting an accurate measurement, because you can see maybe, this one is slightly stretched, so that might not give me the best reading. So this here, this is not a gnome hat. David the gnome has not worn this. I may have worn it a couple of times, but what it is an O-ring measuring tool. And it's easy to use. You start by finding the cross section of your O-ring by lining it up in one of these little notches around the base. In this case, I believe this is our cross section notch, and then there's number codes all the way up it, and these are standard O-ring sizes, so then you just drop it on there. And this is where it would have got me trying to measure a stretched one, potentially. And you find the right groove to set it on, or the right shoulder, and then the number that corresponds to your cross-section notch is the size of the O-ring. In this case, it's a 235 or 236. It's a 236. So now I can spend 10 cents on the next O-ring instead of $15, you know. I'm gonna wrap this one up right here. I gotta get one O-ring and order 2 wheel cylinders, then we can go back together with it. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you then. This is gonna drive me crazy trying to figure out where this went. I'll be up nights thinking about, wait, I got a parts manual. What am I talking about? I got diagrams. We're good.